What alien secrets are hidden inside Area 51? A dramatized documentary narrative. Chapter 1. The Valley of Secrets. Deep in the Nevada desert, where the air shimmers with heat and mirages dance on the horizon like memories of water, there exists a place that officially doesn't exist. At least, that's what the government claimed for nearly half a century. Groom Lake stretches across the desert floor like a vast, dry scar in the earth. Perfectly flat, eerily silent. Surrounded by mountains that rise from the desert like ancient sentinels, keeping watch over secrets that could redefine humanity's understanding of technology, intelligence, and our place in the cosmic order. The lakebed itself tells a story of geological time, of waters that once filled this basin millions of years ago, leaving behind a natural runway longer and smoother than anything human engineers could construct. Nature, it seemed, had prepared this place for aircraft that wouldn't be invented for eons. Or perhaps, aircraft that had already been invented, somewhere else entirely. In 1955, this remote corner of the Nevada test site was selected for a purpose so classified that even its existence would remain officially denied until 2013. The Central Intelligence Agency needed a place to test aircraft so advanced, so far beyond conventional aeronautics, that any accidental sighting had to be explainable as natural phenomena or pilot error. What they couldn't have anticipated was how many sightings would prove impossible to explain. The man who first recognized the potential of this desolate valley was Clarence Kelly Johnson, chief designer at Lockheed's Skunk Works division. Johnson had a reputation for creating aircraft that seemed to defy the laws of physics, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with conventional engineering. But as he stood on the shore of the ancient lakebed, briefcase full of classified designs at his side, Johnson felt something he'd never experienced before in his decades of aircraft development. The sense that this place was already occupied by technologies that made his most advanced concepts seem primitive. "This'll do," he told the CIA representatives who'd flown him out from Las Vegas in an unmarked transport. "Remote enough for security, flat enough for testing, and close enough to our facilities in Burbank for logistics." What Johnson didn't mention was the strange reading he'd gotten on his compass during the flight over. The way the needle had spun wildly as they approached the valley, as if the very ground beneath them was generating magnetic fields that shouldn't exist. The way the air itself seemed to hum with an energy that had nothing to do with desert winds or geological activity. Within months, construction began on what would become the most secret military installation in American history. Hangars rose from the desert floor like metallic mushrooms, their shapes dictated by functions that couldn't be discussed in public. Runways extended across the lakebed with mathematical precision, designed to accommodate aircraft whose specifications existed only in classified files. But it was the underground facilities that would define Area 51's true purpose. Beneath the visible structures, construction crews excavated chambers and corridors that descended deep into the desert bedrock. Climate-controlled storage areas, laboratories equipped with analysis equipment that pushed the boundaries of 1950s technology, meeting rooms designed for briefings that would never appear in official records, and in the deepest levels, storage facilities designed to house materials that officially didn't exist. The first shipment arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 1955, transported in unmarked trucks that had driven through the night from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. The convoy was escorted by military police who'd been given no information beyond classified materials transfer and maximum security protocol. Dr. Sarah Chen supervised the unloading personally. After 8 years of studying the Roswell debris at Wright-Patterson, she'd been transferred to Nevada to establish research programs that could operate without the bureaucratic oversight that limited her work in Ohio. As workers carried sealed containers into the underground storage areas, Chen felt a familiar mixture of excitement and trepidation. Each container held fragments of technology that represented leaps forward in human understanding, but also reminders of how much humanity still didn't know about the universe it inhabited. "Careful with that one," she called out as workers struggled with a particularly heavy container. "The contents are irreplaceable, more irreplaceable than the workers could imagine." Inside that container were beam structures covered with symbols that no human language could decode, metallic materials that exhibited properties that violated known laws of physics, and energy storage systems that continued to function without any identifiable power source. The debris from Mac Brazel's ranch had found a new home, deep beneath the Nevada desert where it could be studied without public scrutiny or congressional oversight. Area 51 was officially born as a testing facility for experimental aircraft. Unofficially, it became the repository for humanity's most profound secrets. That first night, as construction workers settled into temporary quarters and security personnel established perimeters that would remain inviolate for decades, strange lights appeared in the desert sky above Groom Lake. Not the familiar patterns of conventional aircraft or the predictable paths of satellites and celestial objects. These lights moved with purpose and intelligence, following flight patterns that suggested familiarity with the valley's geography, as if they were checking on new neighbors. Security cameras recorded the phenomena, but the footage was immediately classified under protocols that made it invisible to everyone except the handful of individuals with clearances that officially didn't exist. Dr. Chen watched the recordings in a secure conference room, her scientific training warring with implications that challenged everything she'd been taught about humanity's cosmic isolation. "They know we're here," she reported to her superiors. "Whatever intelligence was responsible for the Roswell incident is aware that we've established a permanent research facility." "Are they a threat?" asked Colonel Matthews, the base security commander. Chen considered the question carefully. In her years of studying alien technology, she'd found no evidence of weapon systems or aggressive capabilities. The crashed materials suggested reconnaissance and observation, not invasion or conquest. "I don't think they're here to harm us," she said finally. "I think they're here to watch us." Outside, in the vast Nevada desert, the lights continued their silent patrol above Area 51, maintaining surveillance over a facility that was simultaneously humanity's most secret installation and the most obvious evidence of contact between Earth and intelligences from elsewhere in the universe. The watchers and the watched had found each other at last, but neither side was ready to make the first official contact. Not yet. In the desert silence, broken only by the distant hum of generators and the occasional call of a coyote, Area 51 settled into its role as the keeper of impossible secrets, the place where the future went to hide from the present, and where the present struggled to understand truths that could transform human civilization. If anyone was ready for such transformation, the desert would keep the secrets safe until they were. Chapter 2. The Test Pilots Who Saw Too Much Dawn. Over Area 51 came with colors that seemed stolen from another world. Purples and oranges that bled across the desert sky, painting the mountains in shades that no earthly sunrise should produce. The electromagnetic anomalies that plagued compass readings also affected light refraction, creating atmospheric displays that were beautiful, unsettling, and impossible to photograph accurately. Captain Chuck Yeager knew something was different about this assignment the moment he stepped off the transport plane at what his orders simply called the Nevada facility. He'd broken the sound barrier in the X-1, pushed aircraft to their absolute limits, flown machines that existed at the bleeding edge of human engineering capability. But the hangar he was escorted to that morning contained something that made the X-1 look like a child's toy. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, staring at the craft suspended in the massive underground facility. "What the hell is that thing?" The object defied easy description. Roughly triangular, but with curves that seemed to flow rather than being constructed. No visible propulsion system. No exhaust ports. No conventional control surfaces. Its surface appeared to be made of the same impossible material that Dr. Chen had been studying for years. Metallic, but somehow alive, reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "That, Captain," said Dr. William Menzel, the base's chief aeronautical engineer, "is why you're here. We need someone with your skills to figure out how it flies." Yeager walked around the craft slowly, his pilot's eye cataloging details that didn't make sense. The proportions were wrong for any conventional aircraft. Too small for the wing loading, too light for the apparent structural strength, too advanced for any technology he understood. "Where'd it come from?" he asked, though he suspected he wouldn't get a straight answer. "That's classified above your security level, Captain. What matters is that we have it, and we need to understand its flight characteristics." What Dr. Menzel didn't tell Yeager was that this wasn't the only craft in storage beneath Area 51. In adjacent hangars, 3 more vehicles waited in various states of repair and analysis. Each one had been recovered from crash sites across the American Southwest, each one representing technology that was decades, possibly centuries, ahead of human achievement. The craft Yeager was studying had come down near Kingman, Arizona in 1953. Unlike the Roswell incident, this crash had been detected by military radar installations, allowing recovery teams to reach the site within hours. What they found challenged every assumption about the limits of aeronautical engineering. "The damn thing was still partially functional when we found it," Dr. Menzel had confided to Dr. Chen during their initial assessment. Some kind of automatic pilot system was still operating, trying to maintain altitude even though half the craft was damaged. Now, 2 years later, they were asking human pilots to interface with technology that operated on principles beyond current scientific understanding. Yeager's first attempt to enter the craft took 3 hours, not because of mechanical complexity, but because the access systems seemed to respond to something other than physical interaction. Touch-sensitive controls that required specific pressure and duration, panels that opened in response to body heat or bioelectric fields, as if the craft was designed for beings whose physiology was similar to, but not identical to, human anatomy. The cockpit, if you can call it that, doesn't have conventional instruments, Yeager reported after his initial examination. No gauges, no switches, no obvious flight controls, just these smooth panels that light up when you get near them. Dr. Chen had joined the evaluation team, bringing with her years of experience analyzing materials that defied conventional physics. As she watched Yeager explore the craft's interior, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. The symbols that appeared on the control panels were identical to those she'd cataloged from the Roswell debris. "Captain," she said quietly, "touch that panel there. The one with the hieroglyphic-like markings." Yeager pressed his palm against the indicated surface. Immediately, the entire craft came alive with soft illumination, panels glowing with patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Son of a bitch," he whispered. "It's responding to me." What happened next would be classified at levels that made other Area 51 secrets seem like casual conversation. The craft's systems synchronized with Yeager's nervous system in ways that suggested biotechnology, far in advance of anything human science could produce. Flight controls that responded to thought rather than physical manipulation. Navigation systems that interfaced directly with the pilot's spatial awareness. Propulsion that operated by manipulating gravity itself. Yeager's first flight in the craft lasted exactly 17 minutes. 17 minutes during which he experienced flight characteristics that redefined his understanding of what was possible in the air. No acceleration forces despite instantaneous speed changes that should have been fatal. Maneuvers that violated basic laws of inertia and momentum. Altitude changes that occurred without any sensation of climbing or diving. "It doesn't fly," he reported during his debrief, struggling to find words for experiences that had no precedent in human aviation. "It just goes where you want it to go, like the craft can read your intentions and translate them into movement." The implications were staggering. If human pilots could learn to operate these vehicles, it would represent a quantum leap in aerospace capability. Aircraft that could outperform anything in the Soviet arsenal by margins that would make conventional air defense obsolete. But there were complications. During his third test flight, Yeager experienced something that wasn't in any pilot training manual. As he pushed the craft to higher altitudes, testing its performance envelope, he began receiving what could only be described as communications, not radio transmissions. Something more direct. images and concepts that appeared in his mind without passing through his ears or eyes, geometric patterns that conveyed meaning without words, mathematical relationships that explained propulsion principles his conscious mind couldn't grasp, and underlying it all, a sense of presence that suggested he wasn't alone in the craft. "There's something in there with me," he told Dr. Chen after landing. "Not physically, but some kind of intelligence that's part of the vehicle's systems." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. She'd suspected as much from her materials analysis. The technology wasn't just advanced. It was integrated with some form of artificial intelligence that bordered on consciousness. "Captain, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe this technology is of terrestrial origin?" Yeager had spent his career dealing with classified aircraft projects, experimental designs that pushed the boundaries of human engineering. He knew the difference between advanced and impossible. "Ma'am, I've flown every secret aircraft the U.S. has developed over the past decade. This isn't an evolution of our technology. This is something else entirely." That night, as Yeager sat in his quarters writing reports that would never be read by anyone outside Area 51's security perimeter, strange lights appeared in the sky above Groom Lake once again. But this time, they weren't just observing. They were communicating. Radar operators tracked objects that approached the base's airspace, then stopped at the exact boundary of restricted territory, hovering, waiting, as if they were aware of the invisible lines that defined Area 51's security zone and were respecting those boundaries. One of the objects descended to an altitude of approximately 5,000 feet and remained stationary directly above the hangar where Yeager's test craft was stored, for exactly 17 minutes, the same duration as his first flight, as if they knew precisely how long one of their vehicles had been airborne with a human pilot and were acknowledging that milestone. Then, as silently as they had appeared, the lights ascended into the star-filled desert sky and vanished. Dr. Chen watched the radar tracks fade from the screens, her mind racing with implications that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. They weren't just being observed anymore, they were being evaluated. And somewhere in the depths of Area 51, in storage facilities that officially didn't exist, more craft waited for test pilots brave enough to interface with technology that could transform human civilization, or destroy it if they made the wrong choices. The test had begun. Chapter 3: The Reverse Engineering Revolution. In the subterranean laboratories of Area 51, fluorescent lights hummed 24 hours a day, illuminating work that would have been impossible to explain to the outside world. Dr. Sarah Chen had assembled a team of the most brilliant minds in aerospace engineering, materials science, and theoretical physics, all bound by security oaths that made their work invisible to history. They were trying to reverse engineer God's own technology, or at least technology so advanced that the distinction had become academic. The propulsion system operates on principles we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Robert Lazar explained to the assembled research team. Lazar had been recruited from Los Alamos National Laboratory, where his work on advanced physics had caught the attention of intelligence officers looking for scientists capable of thinking beyond conventional limitations. The craft manipulate what we call the strong nuclear force, the same force that holds atomic nuclei together. But instead of using it for nuclear reactions, they're somehow harnessing it to create localized gravitational fields. The implications were staggering. If human scientists could understand and replicate this technology, it would revolutionize not just aviation, but humanity's entire relationship with physics. Spacecraft that could travel between planets without requiring massive fuel loads. Energy generation that could power cities without environmental impact. Materials that could be constructed at the molecular level, with properties that exceeded anything nature provided. But understanding the technology and replicating it were vastly different challenges. Dr. Chen's materials analysis had revealed construction techniques that seemed to violate basic laws of matter. The metallic components were organized at the atomic level in ways that shouldn't have been stable, yet remained unchanged after years of study. Computer models suggested the materials should have collapsed into simpler molecular arrangements within microseconds. Instead, they maintained structural integrity that defied explanation. "It's as if the atoms are being held in place by some external force field," she reported during one of the weekly progress meetings. "Remove a sample from the main debris, and it maintains the same impossible properties. It's like each fragment remembers its place in the larger structure." The electronics, if they could be called electronics, were even more baffling. Components that appeared to be solid crystal formations functioned as processors, memory storage, and communication systems simultaneously. No discrete circuits, no conventional logical pathways, just crystalline matrices that processed information in ways human computer science couldn't begin to reproduce. "We're essentially trying to understand a smartphone using vacuum tube technology," Dr. Lazar noted with frustration. "The conceptual gap is so vast that we can observe what the technology does, but we can't comprehend how it does it." Yet slowly, incrementally, breakthroughs began to emerge. In 1962, engineers at Bell Laboratories announced the development of the first light-emitting diode. The technology appeared to emerge from theoretical research into semiconductor physics, but careful observers might have noticed similarities to the illumination systems found in the Area 51 craft. 3 years later, Intel produced its first integrated circuit, miniaturizing electronic components in ways that seemed revolutionary to the computing industry. The techniques bore a suspicious resemblance to the solid-state processing systems Dr. Chen's team had been studying for over a decade. "Are we seeing natural technological evolution?" Dr. Chen wondered in her classified reports. "Or are our discoveries being channeled into commercial development through unofficial channels?" The answer came during a classified briefing in 1967, when Colonel Phillips, the new base commander, outlined what he called the dissemination protocol. "Selected insights from our research are being shared with defense contractors through intermediary agencies," he explained to the assembled scientists. "The technology is too advanced for direct transfer, but individual components and principles can be integrated into existing development programs." It was a brilliant strategy for introducing revolutionary technologies without revealing their true origins. A fiber optic communication system could be explained as an advancement in light transmission theory. Night vision equipment could be attributed to improvements in photon detection. Stealth aircraft materials could be described as breakthroughs in radar-absorbing compounds. Each innovation seemed like a logical next step in human technological development, when in fact they represented fragments of alien engineering being carefully reverse-engineered and domesticated for terrestrial use. But not everything could be safely released to the civilian world. Deep in Area 51's most secure facilities, research continued on propulsion systems that could eliminate the need for fossil fuels, energy sources that could provide unlimited power without environmental impact, and materials that could revolutionize manufacturing across every industry. Technologies that could transform human civilization overnight. Technologies that could also destabilize every existing power structure on the planet. "The question isn't whether we can understand these systems," Dr. Lazar observed during one particularly frustrating research session. "The question is whether human society can handle the implications of understanding them." The craft's propulsion technology, for example, operated by creating localized distortions in space-time itself. Matter and energy were manipulated at the quantum level to produce effects that made conventional physics seem quaint. If such capabilities became widely available, it would render obsolete not just transportation systems, but entire industries built around energy scarcity and resource limitations. Who would need oil if every vehicle could be powered by devices that extracted energy directly from the quantum vacuum? What would happen to global economics if materials could be transmuted at the atomic level, making rare elements as common as sand? How would governments maintain control if individuals had access to technologies that made national borders meaningless? The research continued, but always with the understanding that some discoveries were too dangerous for immediate application. In 1969, as America celebrated landing humans on the moon using chemical rockets and primitive computer guidance, Scientists at Area 51 were testing vehicles that could have made the Apollo program look like a historical reenactment. The contrast wasn't lost on the researchers who worked in both worlds. By day, they celebrated humanity's greatest technological achievement. By night, they studied evidence of technologies that made that achievement seem like the first tentative steps of a species still learning to walk. "We're living in two different centuries simultaneously," Dr. Chen wrote in her personal journal. One of the few records of her thoughts that wasn't immediately classified. The public world of 1969, where space travel requires massive rockets and months of preparation, and the classified world where we have vehicles that could reach Mars in a matter of days. But perhaps the most significant discovery wasn't technological at all. It was the growing evidence that the beings who created these craft were still around, still watching, still waiting for humanity to evolve enough to handle direct contact. The lights that appeared regularly over Area 51 followed patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. They seemed particularly interested in the progress of reverse engineering efforts, appearing more frequently during breakthrough periods and remaining absent during routine research phases, as if they were monitoring human progress toward understanding their technology, as if they were waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves more directly. In the deepest levels of Area 51, in vaults that required security clearances most government officials didn't know existed, materials waited that could answer humanity's most fundamental questions about life, intelligence, and our place in the cosmos. But first, humanity had to prove it was ready for those answers. The reverse engineering revolution was just the beginning of a much larger transformation, one that would determine whether human civilization was mature enough to join a larger community of intelligence that spanned the stars, or whether it would remain quarantined on a single planet until it evolved beyond its current limitations. The watchers were still watching, the test was still in progress, and deep in the Nevada desert, the future continued to be assembled, one impossible breakthrough at a time. Chapter 4. The Whistleblowers and the Witnesses, Las Vegas, 1989. The city that never slept was about to be shaken awake by revelations that would transform Area 51 from a military secret into a global obsession. Bob Lazar sat in the offices of KLAS-TV, facing investigative reporter George Knapp with a story that would either establish him as one of the most important whistleblowers in American history or destroy his credibility forever. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows that made him look older than his 30 years. But his eyes held the steady conviction of a man who'd seen too much to remain silent. "I worked at a facility called S4, about 15 miles south of Area 51, Lazar began, his voice carefully measured. "My job was to reverse engineer propulsion systems from craft of extraterrestrial origin." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge to every comfortable assumption about government secrecy and humanity's cosmic isolation. Knapp had built his career on investigating stories other reporters wouldn't touch, but nothing had prepared him for the detailed, technical account that Lazar began to unfold. This wasn't the rambling testimony of a confused witness or the grandiose claims of someone seeking attention. This was the methodical report of a scientist describing work that sounded impossible, but contained too many specific details to dismiss. "The craft operate on principles we call gravitational field amplification and distortion," Lazar continued, sketching diagrams on a legal pad as he spoke. "They use a fuel source we designated Element 115, a stable super-heavy element that doesn't exist in nature on Earth, but can be synthetically produced in microscopic quantities." What Lazar couldn't know was that his description matched classified research that Dr. Sarah Chen and her team had been conducting at Area 51 for over 30 years. His account of propulsion systems that manipulated space-time geometry corresponded exactly to theories that existed only in the most secure files of the most classified program in American history. Either he'd worked where he claimed to work, or he'd somehow gained access to information that was supposed to be impossible to obtain. "How many craft did you see?" Knapp asked. 9, in various stages of research. 3 were completely intact and functional. The others had been damaged during recovery, or were being disassembled for component analysis. As Lazar's interview aired on Las Vegas television that November, phone calls began flooding into KLAS from viewers who claimed to have seen strange lights in the desert sky south of Las Vegas. The same area where Lazar said S4 was located. The same area where, according to Lazar, test flights of recovered alien craft took place on Wednesday evenings. George Knapp began organizing viewing expeditions, taking groups of observers to vantage points along the perimeter of the restricted area. What they witnessed defied conventional explanation. Lights that rose from the desert floor and accelerated to incredible speeds without producing sonic booms. Objects that changed direction in ways that should have been impossible for any known aircraft. Craft that displayed flight characteristics exactly matching what Lazar had described during his interviews. "Jesus Christ," whispered Jim Tagliani, a former Air Force mechanic who'd joined one of Knapp's desert vigils. "That thing just did a 90-degree turn at what had to be 2,000 miles per hour. No human pilot could survive those G-forces." Gene Huff, Lazar's friend who'd accompanied him to several viewing sessions before Bob went public, watched the lights through binoculars with growing amazement. "Bob told us exactly when and where to look. And there they are, right on schedule." But the most significant witness wasn't on the ground outside Area 51's perimeter. Dennis Mariani had spent 15 years as a radar operator at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas, tracking civilian and military aircraft through some of the busiest airspace in the American Southwest. He'd seen experimental aircraft from Nellis Air Force Base, military exercises, and every type of conventional traffic that used Nevada's skies. What appeared on his radar screens on the nights when Knapp's observers reported unusual lights wasn't conventional by any definition. Objects would appear at the edge of the restricted area, moving at speeds that exceeded anything in our inventory, he told Knapp during a confidential interview. Then they'd stop. Dead stop from maybe 3,000 miles per hour to zero in an instant. Stay motionless for a few minutes, then accelerate straight up until they disappeared from our tracking range. Mariani's radar records provided independent confirmation of phenomena that matched Lazar's descriptions exactly. But when he requested official guidance on how to report the unusual readings, he was told to classify them as equipment malfunctions and delete the files. "That's when I knew this was bigger than just experimental aircraft," he said. "They were covering up things that our own radar systems were detecting." The story might have remained a local Las Vegas curiosity, but other witnesses began emerging from decades of enforced silence. Steve Bisk had worked construction at Area 51 during the 1960s, building the underground facilities that officially didn't exist. He'd signed security oaths that prevented him from discussing his work, but Lazar's revelations convinced him that the time for silence had passed. "We built storage areas and laboratories deep underground," he confirmed during a meeting with Knapp. "Climate-controlled environments with security systems unlike anything I'd seen in conventional military construction. The specs called for facilities that could house materials requiring special containment procedures." "What kind of materials?" Knapp asked. "That was above my clearance level. But the containment requirements suggested materials that were either extremely hazardous or extremely valuable. Maybe both." As 1989 turned into 1990, more witnesses came forward with pieces of a puzzle that had been hidden for over 4 decades. Military personnel who'd seen unusual aircraft during flights over Nevada. Radar operators who'd tracked objects that violated known flight characteristics. Construction workers who'd built facilities designed for purposes they weren't allowed to understand. Each account added detail to a picture that was becoming impossible to ignore. Area 51 wasn't just a testing facility for experimental aircraft. It was a repository for technology that originated somewhere other than Earth. But the government's response to these revelations demonstrated just how deeply the secrets were buried and how far officials would go to protect them. Bob Lazar found himself under investigation by multiple federal agencies. His educational records mysteriously disappeared from MIT and Caltech. His employment history was systematically erased from official databases. Friends and family members were questioned by men who carried credentials but offered no explanations. The message was clear. Talking about Area 51's real purpose carried consequences that could destroy lives. Yet the witnesses continued to come forward, driven by the recognition that some truths were too important to remain buried. Dr. Michael Wolff, who claimed to have worked on classified projects involving extraterrestrial technology, provided accounts that corroborated many of Lazar's technical descriptions. His background in theoretical physics and government contracting gave weight to testimony that might otherwise have been dismissed. The technology exists, he insisted during carefully arranged interviews. We've been studying it for decades, reverse engineering what we can, trying to understand propulsion systems that operate on principles our physics textbooks say are impossible. The testimonies created a critical mass of credibility that mainstream media could no longer ignore. Network television programs began featuring segments on Area 51. Documentary filmmakers traveled to Nevada to interview witnesses and film the mysterious lights that appeared with such regularity that they became tourist attractions. But perhaps the most significant validation came from an unexpected source. In 1993, the U.S. Air Force officially acknowledged the existence of Area 51 for the first time, though only to justify new restrictions on public access to the surrounding area. The acknowledgement was carefully worded, admitting only to classified flight test activities, while providing no details about what those activities involved. It was the kind of limited disclosure that revealed more through what it didn't say than through what it did. If Area 51 was simply a conventional military testing facility, why had its existence been denied for nearly 40 years? If the activities there involved only terrestrial aircraft development, why were the security measures so extreme that they exceeded those at nuclear weapons facilities? If the testimonies of whistleblowers like Bob Lazar were false, why were such extensive resources devoted to discrediting them and erasing their backgrounds? The questions multiplied faster than the official answers could address them. And in the deep Nevada desert, beneath facilities that now attracted international attention, the real secrets remained as protected as ever. The watchers had been exposed, but what they were watching remained hidden. The witnesses had broken their silence, but the evidence they described stayed locked away in vaults that most government officials didn't know existed. Area 51 had become famous around the world as a symbol of government secrecy and possible extraterrestrial contact. But fame and truth, it turned out, were very different things. The most important secrets were still secret. The most profound evidence was still buried. And somewhere in the desert sky, lights continued to appear on schedule, following patterns that suggested the watchers were still watching, still evaluating humanity's readiness for revelations that could transform civilization or destroy it. Chapter 5: The Culture of Secrecy. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. Pacific Time, waking Dr. Patricia Hayes from restless sleep in her Mojave Desert trailer. 25 years of working in classified aerospace programs had taught her to answer middle-of-the-night calls without hesitation. In the world of black projects, emergencies didn't follow normal business hours. Dr. Hayes, this is Colonel Morrison at Groom Lake. We need you here immediately. Hayes had been expecting this call for months, ever since Bob Lazar's revelations had turned Area 51 from the government's best-kept secret into an international obsession. As a specialist in crisis management and information security, she'd built her career helping classified programs navigate public exposure while protecting their most sensitive operations. But Area 51 presented challenges unlike anything in her experience. The drive from her home near Edwards Air Force Base to Groom Lake took 4 hours through desert landscape that looked like the surface of an alien planet. Appropriate, Hayes thought grimly, considering what waited at her destination. As her rental car approached the security checkpoint at the outer perimeter, she could see the changes that public attention had brought to America's most secret facility. Additional guard posts, new electronic surveillance equipment, warning signs in multiple languages informing visitors that deadly force was authorized beyond the perimeter. Most significantly, crowds of people gathered at the boundary fence, some with cameras and recording equipment, others simply staring into the restricted area as if they could will the secrets to reveal themselves through observation alone. UFO tourists, explained the security guard as he processed Hayes's clearance, started showing up after that Lazar character went on TV. Some days we get hundreds of them, camping out with telescopes and night vision equipment. Hayes nodded, though privately, she wondered how many of the tourists were actually foreign intelligence agents taking advantage of the chaos to conduct surveillance operations. The attention that was supposed to expose Area 51 secrets was also providing perfect cover for enemies to gather information about America's most classified programs. Inside the facility, she was briefed by Colonel Morrison and a committee of officials whose security clearances existed at levels that didn't appear on any public organizational chart. "The situation is deteriorating," Morrison explained, gesturing to charts that tracked media coverage, public interest, and congressional inquiries related to Area 51. "We're receiving Freedom of Information Act requests that are forcing us to acknowledge programs we've never admitted existed. Reporters are filing lawsuits demanding access to information that could compromise national security." But the real problem wasn't public curiosity about conventional aircraft development. The real problem was that some of the public speculation was getting uncomfortably close to classified truths. Internet discussion groups are sharing technical details that match our actual research findings, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the base's information security specialist, reported. "Either we have serious security leaks, or some very smart people are making extremely accurate guesses about technologies we've never publicly discussed." Hayes reviewed samples of online discussions about Area 51, feeling her pulse quicken as she recognized details that should have been impossible for civilians to know. Descriptions of propulsion systems that matched classified research, speculation about materials with properties that corresponded exactly to debris recovered from crash sites, theories about reverse engineering programs that were essentially accurate despite being based entirely on logical deduction. "How is this possible?" she asked. "Multiple factors," Walsh explained. "Former employees who violated their security oaths, researchers who've independently developed theories that parallel our classified work, and possibly—" Walsh hesitated, glancing at the other committee members before continuing. "Possibly information that's being deliberately leaked by sources outside our control." The implications hung in the air like a challenge to everything Hayes understood about information security. In conventional classified programs, leaks came from human sources, disgruntled employees, foreign agents, or whistleblowers with political motivations. But if the information was coming from outside human channels entirely— "Are you suggesting," Hayes asked carefully, "that non-human intelligence might be influencing public disclosure?" The question that no one wanted to voice directly, but that haunted every conversation about Area 51's exposure. Colonel Morrison opened a classified file marked with security designations Hayes had never seen before. Inside were surveillance reports, communication intercepts, and behavioral analyses that painted a picture of coordinated information release that seemed to operate beyond human control. "The timing is too precise to be coincidental," he explained. "Lazar's revelations coincided exactly with increased UFO activity over the restricted area. The witnesses who've come forward all had security clearances that should have prevented them from speaking publicly. The technical information being discussed online appears faster than our own research teams can generate it." Dr. Walsh added another disturbing detail. "We've detected electronic communications within the restricted area that don't originate from any of our equipment. Transmissions using frequencies and modulation techniques that our best analysts can't decode, but that seem to be coordinating the release of specific information to public sources." Hayes felt the foundation of her professional expertise shifting beneath her. Information security was built on the assumption that humans controlled all communication channels, that secrets could be protected by controlling access to data and limiting personnel exposure. But what if the intelligence that created the technology being studied at Area 51 was actively managing its own disclosure? "What are your recommendations?" Morrison asked. Hayes considered options that all seemed inadequate for the situation they faced. Conventional damage control assumed that secrets could be contained through denial and disinformation. But Area 51's secrets appeared to be revealing themselves through channels that human security couldn't control. "We need to shift from containment to management," she said finally. "Instead of trying to hide everything, we control what gets revealed and how it's interpreted." It was the beginning of what would become known within classified circles as the Disclosure Protocol, a systematic approach to revealing selected truths while protecting the most sensitive information. Over the following months, Hayes orchestrated a carefully managed campaign of limited admissions and strategic denials. The Air Force acknowledged that Area 51 was indeed a classified facility where experimental aircraft were tested. Officials admitted that some UFO sightings might be attributed to observations of advanced but terrestrial technology. Selected military personnel were authorized to discuss their experiences within carefully defined parameters. But the deepest secrets remained protected. No official acknowledgement of recovered alien technology. No discussion of reverse engineering programs. No admission that the United States government possessed physical evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. The strategy worked, to a point. Public interest in Area 51 stabilized at levels that were manageable but persistent. Conspiracy theories flourished, but they were mixed with so much speculation and disinformation that genuine secrets became indistinguishable from fiction. Yet the intelligence that had originally created the technology being studied at Area 51 continued to demonstrate its own agenda for disclosure. On clear nights, when atmospheric conditions were optimal for observation, craft displaying impossible flight characteristics appeared over the restricted area with such regularity that they became a tourist attraction. The objects seemed to time their appearances for maximum visibility, following patterns that ensured they would be witnessed and recorded by the growing community of UFO researchers who gathered outside the base perimeter. "They're putting on a show," observed Glenn Campbell, a computer programmer who'd become an unofficial chronicler of Area 51 activities. Campbell had established a research station outside the restricted area, documenting sightings and analyzing patterns of unusual activity with scientific rigor. "The objects appear on a schedule," he told a gathering of researchers. "Same locations, same altitudes, same flight patterns, but only when there are observers present to witness them. It's as if they want to be seen, but only by people who are actively looking." Dr. Hayes reviewed Campbell's data with growing unease. The pattern suggested intelligence that was far more sophisticated than simple technology demonstration. The craft appeared when their presence would generate maximum public interest, while remaining plausibly deniable by official sources. It was a communication strategy that bypassed government control entirely, reaching the public directly while maintaining the ambiguity necessary to avoid forcing immediate official acknowledgement. "They're conducting their own disclosure program," she realized during one of her classified briefings. "Independent of anything we're doing, they're gradually accustoming the public to their presence." The implications were staggering. If non-human intelligence was actively managing its own revelation to humanity, then all of the government's secrecy efforts were essentially irrelevant. The truth would emerge on a timeline determined by entities whose capabilities and motivations remained largely unknown. More troubling was the possibility that this had always been the case, that the crashes at Roswell and other sites hadn't been accidents at all, but deliberate introductions of technology designed to accelerate human development in specific directions. That Area 51 wasn't a facility where humans were reverse engineering alien technology, but a laboratory where human progress was being carefully guided by intelligence that remained hidden but deeply involved in terrestrial affairs. Deep in the classified archives of Area 51, Dr. Sarah Chen had reached similar conclusions. After 4 decades of studying materials that consistently revealed new complexities rather than yielding to human understanding, She'd begun to suspect that the technology was designed to be studied rather than simply used. Every breakthrough leads to new questions, she noted in reports that were classified beyond the reach of most government officials. It's as if the materials are teaching us, revealing information at a pace that matches our ability to comprehend it, but never more than we're ready to handle. The education was subtle, but unmistakable. Insights that led to advances in human technology without revealing the fundamental principles that made such advances possible. Knowledge that accelerated terrestrial development while maintaining the mystery of its ultimate source. Humanity was being guided toward greater technical capability, but on a schedule determined by teachers who remained invisible. The culture of secrecy that surrounded Area 51 had evolved into something far more complex than simple information control. It was a collaborative effort between human officials trying to manage disclosure and non-human intelligence managing its own revelation, each side pursuing complementary but independent agendas. The secrets were still secret, but they were secrets that wanted to be revealed. The Watchers were still watching, but they were also actively participating in the process they observed. And in the desert sky above Area 51, lights continued to appear on schedule, following patterns that suggested a carefully orchestrated program of gradual disclosure that would transform human civilization one impossible sighting at a time. The culture of secrecy had become a culture of managed revelation. The question was no longer whether the truth would emerge, but whether humanity would be ready when it did. Chapter 6. The Technology Gap. In the sterile corridors of Area 51's deepest underground levels, where security clearances required background investigations that probed 3 generations back, Dr. Michael Harrison stood before a holographic display that would have seemed like magic to scientists working just 50 feet above his head. The display showed molecular structures rotating in 3-dimensional space, their atomic bonds rendered in colors that corresponded to energy states no terrestrial laboratory had ever measured. Each structure represented a component of technology recovered from crash sites across the American Southwest, materials that continued to reveal new impossibilities after 5 decades of intensive study. The atomic lattice shouldn't be stable, Harrison muttered to his research partner, Dr. Lisa Chang, a quantum physicist who'd been recruited from MIT specifically for work that could never appear on her academic resume. The electron configurations violate basic principles of atomic theory, but the materials show no degradation after decades of storage. Chang adjusted the display parameters, zooming in on molecular details that challenged everything their scientific training had taught them about the limits of matter organization. It's as if the atoms are being held in place by some external organizing principle. Remove a sample from the main structure, and it maintains the same impossible properties. The fragments remember their quantum states independently of their physical environment. This was the heart of Area 51's most classified research, the gradually growing understanding that the recovered technology didn't just represent advanced engineering, but fundamentally different approaches to manipulating reality at the quantum level. The implications rippled through every branch of science. Physics that operated by principles not yet discovered by human researchers. Material science that achieved properties by manipulating atomic bonds in ways terrestrial laboratories couldn't duplicate. Energy systems that appeared to extract power directly from the quantum vacuum, the underlying field that quantum mechanics suggested filled all of empty space. Look at this propulsion component, Chung said, highlighting a structure that appeared to be part of a gravity manipulation system. The exotic matter concentrations create localized space-time distortions that effectively cancel gravitational effects. But the energy requirements should be astronomical, equivalent to the output of a small star. Harrison studied the readings, feeling the familiar mixture of excitement and frustration that characterized all research into Area 51's deepest secrets. Yet the system operates using power sources we can't even detect. No fuel consumption, no waste heat, no byproducts that show up on any of our instruments. 40 levels above them, in conference rooms that appeared on official organizational charts, Pentagon officials were briefing congressional committees on America's technological capabilities in language carefully designed to reveal nothing about the true extent of classified research. Our aircraft development programs continue to maintain American superiority in all relevant categories. General Patricia Wells testified to a closed session of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Current projects will ensure that U.S. forces retain decisive advantages over any potential adversaries for the foreseeable future. What General Wells couldn't mention was that foreseeable future had an entirely different meaning in the context of technology gaps that spanned centuries rather than decades. The Soviet Union's most advanced fighter aircraft operated using principles that were fundamentally similar to American designs: chemical propulsion, conventional aerodynamics, electronic systems based on terrestrial physics. The performance differences, while militarily significant, represented variations on common technological themes. But deep beneath Area 51, researchers were studying vehicles that made both American and Soviet aircraft seem like historical curiosities. Craft that could accelerate from 0 to supersonic speeds without creating sonic booms, suggesting manipulation of the air molecules themselves, rather than simply pushing through atmospheric resistance. Structural materials that maintained perfect integrity under stresses that should have vaporized any known substance. Navigation systems that appeared to interface directly with gravitational fields, using the Earth's mass as a reference grid for three-dimensional positioning. The performance envelope is essentially unlimited, Dr. Harrison reported to the Oversight Committee that met monthly in rooms shielded against electronic surveillance. Based on our analysis, these vehicles could achieve orbital velocity while remaining within the atmosphere, travel between continents in minutes rather than hours, and perform maneuvers that would be lethal to biological occupants if conventional physics applied. But the most significant discovery wasn't about the vehicles themselves. It was about the intelligence that had created them. The design philosophy is completely different from human engineering approaches, Dr. Chang observed during one of their research sessions. We build machines by assembling separate components that perform specific functions. These craft appear to be grown as integrated organisms, with every element serving multiple purposes simultaneously. The technology suggested minds that thought about problems in ways that were fundamentally alien to human cognitive patterns. Not just more advanced, but operating from entirely different conceptual frameworks about how reality could be organized and manipulated. It's like comparing a Swiss watch to a living cell, Harrison noted in classified reports that were read by officials whose security clearances exceeded those of most cabinet members. Both are sophisticated systems, but they represent completely different approaches to achieving organized complexity. The implications for human technological development were profound and unsettling. If the recovered technology represented the work of intelligence that thought differently about fundamental scientific principles, then reverse engineering wasn't simply a matter of understanding more advanced versions of familiar concepts. It required developing entirely new ways of conceptualizing the relationship between matter, energy, space, and time. Human science was built on the assumption that the universe operated according to mathematical laws that could be discovered and applied through systematic investigation. But the Area 51 materials suggested that those laws might be more like guidelines that could be circumvented by intelligence sophisticated enough to understand deeper organizing principles. We're not just studying alien technology, Dr. Chang realized during a breakthrough moment that would be classified at levels that made other secrets seem routine. We're studying alien physics. They've discovered aspects of reality that we haven't even begun to investigate. Yet slowly, incrementally, human understanding was evolving. Research insights that couldn't be directly applied nevertheless informed terrestrial technology development in subtle but significant ways. Material science advanced through discoveries that seemed to emerge from theoretical investigations but actually reflected careful study of impossible substances. Energy research progressed through breakthroughs that appeared to result from conventional scientific inquiry, but were guided by analysis of systems that violated known thermodynamic principles. By 1995, 50 years after the Roswell incident, human technology had advanced in directions that seemed to follow logical evolutionary paths, but actually represented a carefully managed introduction of concepts derived from non-human sources. Computers that processed information using principles that bore suspicious resemblances to the crystalline processing systems found in recovered craft. Telecommunications networks that transmitted data using methods that seemed to echo the communication technologies observed in Area 51's deepest laboratories. Aerospace developments that achieved performance improvements through techniques that paralleled, in simplified form, the propulsion systems that continued to baffle human researchers. The technology gap is closing. General Wells briefed the president during one of the monthly security updates that addressed threats and capabilities that couldn't be discussed in public forums. But not because we're catching up to them, because they're allowing us to catch up at a pace they seem to control. The realization was both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because it suggested that the intelligence responsible for the technology wasn't hostile. They appeared to be actively assisting human development rather than trying to maintain technological superiority. Terrifying because it implied that human civilization was being guided by entities whose capabilities and motivations remained largely unknown. Entities who could presumably terminate that guidance at any time they chose. In the deepest levels of Area 51, where research continued around the clock on technologies that could revolutionize human civilization, scientists worked with the growing awareness that they were students in a classroom whose teachers remained invisible. The technology gap wasn't just about advanced engineering. It was about advanced intelligence, operating from conceptual frameworks that human minds were only beginning to glimpse, pursuing objectives that remained as mysterious as the technologies themselves. But the education continued. Night after night, in the desert sky above Area 51, demonstrations occurred that gradually accustomed human observers to the reality of capabilities that transcended terrestrial limitations. The watchers were still watching, but they were also teaching. And deep beneath the Nevada desert, in laboratories that officially didn't exist, human students continued their slow progress toward understanding that would either transform their species or reveal just how far they had yet to evolve. Chapter 7. The Disclosure Dilemma. The secure conference room beneath the Pentagon was designed for conversations that could never be recorded, never be referenced in official documents, never be acknowledged by any participant once they left the soundproof chamber 23 levels below ground level. It was here in March 1997 that the most classified committee in the American government wrestled with a problem that had no precedent in human history: how to prepare a civilization for the revelation that it had never been alone in the universe. The polls are consistent. Dr. Rebecca Hartwell, the committee's sociological analysis specialist, reported to the assembled officials. 67% of Americans believe that extraterrestrial intelligence exists somewhere in the universe. 43% believe that such intelligence has already visited Earth. 28% believe the government possesses evidence of alien contact that's being concealed from the public. These weren't casual opinion surveys. They were carefully designed psychological assessments that probed public readiness for revelations that could fundamentally alter human civilization. The results had been tracking upward for decades, suggesting that popular culture, media speculation, and carefully managed leaks had been preparing the general population for truths that had been hidden in places like Area 51 for over 50 years. "The question," said General Harrison, who'd inherited oversight of the most classified programs from his father, "is whether public readiness for the concept translates to public readiness for the reality." It was a distinction that had kept government officials awake at night for generations. Believing that aliens might exist was vastly different from accepting that alien technology was being studied in government laboratories, that human technological development had been influenced by non-human intelligence, that the fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the cosmos were incorrect. "We have contingency plans for nuclear war, global economic collapse, and natural disasters," observed CIA Director Patricia Thornton, one of only 7 people in the world who possessed complete access to Area 51's deepest secrets. but we have no reliable framework for managing the social, political, and psychological consequences of confirming extraterrestrial contact. The challenge was unlike anything in the history of information management. Most classified programs protected information that was inherently limited in scope: weapons systems, intelligence operations, diplomatic strategies. The Area 51 secrets touched every aspect of human understanding about reality itself. Religion would be forced to grapple with the existence of intelligence that predated and exceeded human development. Science would need to reconcile decades of theoretical frameworks with technologies that demonstrated those frameworks were incomplete. Economics would face disruption from energy and propulsion systems that could make existing industries obsolete overnight. Most problematically, governments would need to explain why they had concealed evidence of the most significant discovery in human history for over half a century. Public trust in institutions is already at historic lows, Dr. Hartwell noted, referencing classified polling data that tracked citizen confidence in government, media, and scientific establishments, revealing that we've been concealing proof of extraterrestrial contact could trigger a complete collapse of social coherence. But the alternative, continued concealment, was becoming increasingly untenable. The internet had democratized information distribution in ways that made traditional secrecy protocols obsolete. Researchers around the world were sharing observations, connecting patterns, and developing theories that approached classified truths with uncomfortable accuracy. Satellite technology was making high-resolution surveillance of restricted areas available to civilian observers. Communication networks allowed witnesses to coordinate their testimonies in ways that made official denial increasingly implausible. The information environment has fundamentally changed, acknowledged Dr. Marcus Webb, the committee's technology assessment coordinator. We can no longer control public access to data the way we could during the Cold War. The secrets are going to emerge whether we manage their release or not. The committee members sat in silence, contemplating implications that had seemed safely distant when they'd first been briefed on Area 51's true purpose years earlier. The gradual disclosure that had seemed like a theoretical contingency was becoming an operational necessity. "What are our options?" General Harrison asked. Dr. Webb consulted classified assessments that had been prepared by teams of analysts, sociologists, and strategic planners working on scenarios that officially didn't exist. Option 1. Continued concealment with increased disinformation efforts to muddy public understanding. Option 2. Selective disclosure of limited information to maintain credibility while protecting core secrets. Option 3. Comprehensive revelation of extraterrestrial contact with carefully managed presentation to minimize social disruption. Each option carried risks that could destabilize human civilization. Continued concealment risked a catastrophic loss of public trust if the full truth emerged through unofficial channels. Selective disclosure risked being overwhelmed by demands for complete information once any official acknowledgement was made. Comprehensive revelation risked psychological, social, and economic chaos that could collapse existing institutions. "There's a fourth option," Director Thornton said quietly. "We let them handle their own disclosure." The committee members understood the reference without explanation. In the sky above Area 51 and other classified facilities, intelligence that remained officially unacknowledged continued to demonstrate its presence with increasing boldness. The craft appeared on schedules that seemed calculated to maximize public observation, while maintaining plausible deniability for official sources. Recent analysis suggested that the demonstrations were becoming more sophisticated, more obviously non-terrestrial, more difficult to explain through conventional means. Their disclosure timeline appears to be accelerating, Dr. Webb confirmed. Sighting reports are increasing exponentially. The craft are displaying capabilities that exceed our ability to attribute them to experimental human technology. Public speculation is approaching classified conclusions through independent observation. It was a remarkable situation. Extraterrestrial intelligence appeared to be conducting its own revelation program. gradually accustoming human observers to their presence while bypassing government control entirely. Intelligence assessments suggest they're following a plan, General Harrison noted, referencing reports from analysts who studied patterns of UFO activity with the same rigor applied to hostile nation surveillance. Systematic exposure that's calibrated to public psychological readiness. They seem to understand human social dynamics better than we do. The implications were simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. Reassuring because it suggested that the intelligence responsible for the technology was actively concerned with minimizing disruption to human society. Their gradual approach implied benevolent intentions and sophisticated understanding of human psychological limitations. Unsettling because it demonstrated that human governments weren't actually in control of the disclosure process. The revelation of extraterrestrial contact would occur on a timeline determined by non-human intelligence, regardless of official readiness or preference. Recommendation? General Harrison asked his committee. Dr. Hartwell consulted psychological profiles and social stability assessments that represented decades of classified research into public readiness for paradigm-shifting revelations. "We prepare for managed cooperation," she said finally. "Instead of trying to control disclosure, we position ourselves to help society manage it when it occurs. Develop frameworks for addressing the questions that will emerge. Create institutional structures that can maintain stability during the transition period. Establish communication protocols for when direct contact becomes inevitable." It was a fundamental shift from concealment to preparation, from controlling information to managing its consequences. The committee spent the following hours developing preliminary frameworks for scenarios that had seemed like science fiction just decades earlier. How to address religious institutions whose cosmologies would require fundamental revision. How to manage economic transitions when energy and propulsion technologies could revolutionize global commerce. How to maintain social cohesion when the basic assumptions about human uniqueness were revealed to be incorrect. Most importantly, how to help human civilization evolve from a species that had been quarantined on a single planet to one that could participate in whatever larger community of intelligence existed among the stars. "The irony," Director Thornton observed as the meeting concluded, "is that after 50 years of keeping these secrets, we may end up helping the public understand revelations that come from the intelligence we've been studying all along." Deep beneath Area 51, in laboratories where the evidence of extraterrestrial contact had been preserved and analyzed for half a century, researchers continued their work with the growing awareness that their discoveries might soon become public knowledge. The watchers were still watching, but their observation was evolving into communication. The secrets were still secret, but secrecy was evolving into preparation for revelation. And somewhere in the desert sky above Nevada, intelligence that had patiently guided human development for decades continued its careful choreography of disclosure, moving human civilization toward a moment of recognition that would transform everything. The disclosure dilemma was no longer about whether to reveal the truth. It was about whether humanity was ready to handle it when the truth revealed itself. Chapter 8. The Moment of Recognition. June 25th, 2021. The date that officially changed everything. In a sterile conference room at the Pentagon, officials who had spent careers protecting the government's deepest secrets prepared to acknowledge truths that had been hidden for over 70 years. The UAP Task Force Report, 96 pages of carefully worded admissions and strategic omissions, represented humanity's first official step toward recognition of a reality that had been concealed since Mac Brazel found debris scattered across his New Mexico ranch in 1947. The UAP documented in this report demonstrate flight characteristics beyond our current understanding of aerodynamics and propulsion. The report stated with the understated precision that characterizes government documents addressing impossible topics. Behind those carefully neutral words lay decades of accumulated evidence that could no longer be dismissed or explained away. Military radar systems had tracked objects displaying capabilities that exceeded any known technology. Fighter pilots had encountered craft that accelerated beyond the limits of material physics. Intelligence analysts had cataloged patterns of behavior that suggested systematic observation by non-human intelligence. The disclosure was limited, carefully bounded by security classifications that protected the most sensitive information. No mention of recovered materials, no acknowledgement of reverse engineering programs, no admission that the United States government had been studying extraterrestrial technology for 3/4 of a century. But it was a beginning. Dr. Jennifer Martinez had spent 35 years at Area 51, inheriting research programs that stretched back to the original analysis of Roswell debris. As she watched the Pentagon briefing from her office deep beneath the Nevada desert, she felt the weight of history shifting toward revelation. Strange to see it happening so formally, she told her research partner, Dr. David Chen, Sarah Chen's son, who had followed his mother into work that officially didn't exist. After all these decades of secrecy, it starts with a government report that admits we don't understand what we're observing. The irony wasn't lost on researchers who had spent their careers trying to understand technology that represented intelligence far more advanced than terrestrial capabilities. The official acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena came from the same government that possessed detailed analysis of materials and propulsion systems that could answer every question the report raised. But that analysis remained classified at levels that transcended normal security protocols. In the year following the Pentagon report, disclosure accelerated in ways that suggested coordination beyond official channels. Military personnel who had been bound by security oaths for decades began speaking publicly about encounters that had been classified for their entire careers. Commander David Fravor described his 2004 encounter with a craft that demonstrated impossible flight characteristics off the coast of California. Lieutenant Ryan Graves testified about objects that appeared daily off the Atlantic seaboard, displaying capabilities that exceeded any known aircraft by orders of magnitude. Intelligence officials acknowledged that similar encounters had been occurring for decades, but had been classified to protect sources and methods. Each revelation added credibility to accounts that had been dismissed as fantasy or misidentification for generations. But the most significant developments weren't happening in government briefing rooms or congressional hearings. Happening in the skies above locations like Area 51, where the intelligence responsible for the phenomena was conducting its own disclosure program with increasing boldness. The craft no longer appeared only during carefully scheduled demonstration periods. They manifested during daylight hours, overpopulated areas, in circumstances that made them impossible to ignore or explain through conventional means. Their behavior suggested intelligence that had decided the time for gradual introduction was ending, that humanity needed to progress more rapidly toward recognition and acceptance. "They're forcing the issue," observed Dr. Luis Elizondo, the former Pentagon official who had managed classified UAP investigations before going public with his findings. "The phenomena are becoming so overt that official denial is no longer sustainable." At Area 51, researchers working with materials that had been recovered decades earlier watched these developments with complex emotions. The secrets they had protected were becoming public knowledge, but in ways that revealed how much additional information remained concealed. Dr. Martinez reviewed classified files that contained answers to questions being debated in public forums. The propulsion systems that generated such speculation among civilian analysts had been partially understood for years through study of recovered materials. The energy sources that powered impossible maneuvers had been analyzed in laboratories that officially didn't exist. The intelligence behind the phenomena had been indirectly communicating through technology transfers for over half a century. "We've been living in the post-disclosure world for decades," she realized during one of her team's research sessions. "The public is just catching up to revelations we've been working with since the 1940s. But the deeper secrets remained protected. The Vatican had quietly assembled committees of theologians and scientists to address the cosmological implications of extraterrestrial intelligence, but those deliberations didn't include access to physical evidence that had been studied for generations. Academic researchers developed theories about possible UFO propulsion systems, but they worked without knowledge of materials that demonstrated those theories in practical application. Government officials testified about the need for scientific investigation of unexplained phenomena, while other government officials continued studying technology that could answer every question raised in public hearings. The disclosure process was revealing enough truth to establish credibility while protecting information that could revolutionize human civilization overnight. In popular culture, the acknowledgement of UAPs triggered a renaissance of scientific speculation and philosophical inquiry. Films, television programs, and documentary series explored implications that had been relegated to fringe discussion for decades. Universities established research programs dedicated to studying aerial phenomena that had gained official recognition. Scientific journals published papers analyzing reports that had previously been dismissed as unworthy of academic attention. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological, rather than technological. The admission that humanity shared the universe with intelligence that exceeded terrestrial capabilities fundamentally altered the context for every aspect of human activity. Space exploration gained new urgency as a search for contact rather than simple discovery. Environmental protection acquired existential importance as preparation for eventual membership in a larger community of intelligence. International cooperation became a necessity for representing human civilization in whatever cosmic community existed beyond Earth's atmosphere. We're no longer alone, and we never were, reflected Dr. Michio Kaku, the theoretical physicist who had spent decades preparing humanity for contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The question now is how quickly we can evolve from a planetary species to an interstellar one. At Area 51, in facilities that continue to operate beyond public awareness despite their legendary status, research continued on technologies that could accelerate that evolution. The materials recovered from crash sites decades earlier continued to yield insights that pushed human understanding toward breakthroughs that could transform civilization. But the technology transfer remained carefully controlled, released at a pace that matched humanity's ability to integrate revolutionary capabilities without collapsing existing social structures. Dr. Martinez often worked late into the desert nights, surrounded by equipment that analyzed substances that officially didn't exist while overhead. Lights moved through the sky in patterns that had become familiar over decades of observation. "They're still watching," she noted in classified reports that were read by officials whose job was to prepare for futures that remained impossible to predict. But the watching is evolving into something more direct. They seem to be preparing for the next phase of contact. What that phase might involve remained classified beyond the reach of most government officials, but patterns in the phenomena suggested systematic preparation for more overt interaction. The craft appeared more frequently over population centers, displaying flight characteristics that made their artificial origin undeniable. Communication attempts were detected by radio telescopes around the world, signals that carried mathematical signatures suggesting non-terrestrial intelligence. Physical evidence, materials that exhibited properties beyond terrestrial capabilities, began appearing at sites that didn't require security clearances to investigate. Humanity was being prepared for revelations that had been hidden in places like Area 51 for 3/4 of a century. The moment of recognition had begun, but it was only the first movement in a symphony of disclosure that could transform human civilization from a single planet species into participants in whatever larger community of intelligence filled the cosmos. In the Nevada desert, where it had all begun with secret facilities built to study impossible technology, the Watchers continued their patient observation, while human civilization slowly awakened to realities that had surrounded it for generations. The secrets were becoming public knowledge. The impossible was becoming acknowledged fact. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, intelligence that had guided human development for decades prepared for the next phase of contact between species separated by vast differences in capability, but connected by the same cosmic origins that had given rise to consciousness throughout the universe. The moment of recognition was just the beginning. The real contact was still to come. in honor of all those who preserved impossible secrets and prepared humanity for revelations that could transform our species from cosmic children into participants in the vast community of intelligence that fills the universe.